Day 173 of the war in Gaza. The IDF released footage of Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists detailing how the groups used Gaza City's Shifa hospital as a base for terror operations. The army also confirmed the killing of Hamas deputy military commander Marwan Issa. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The terror operatives interrogated were among hundreds detained in the vicinity of Shifa Hospital in recent days, amid ongoing large-scale military operations that began last week. They reveal how the terrorists used Shifa and schools as shelter. Operatives disguised themselves as nurses, and they say Hamas had 600 to 1,000 gunmen at the hospital complex.
فالشفاء أو المدارس زي ما أنت عارف كلنا عارفين أو أماكن مشابهة زي هيك كانت الملجأ أو الملاذ.
أنت جهاد إسلامي. أنا بعرف وين مسكوا ناس من الجهاد الإسلامي في الشفاء.
أوكي. وين مسكوه؟
في الشفاء.
في الشفاء. في المستشفى.
في المستشفى صحيح.
قد إيش صار لك هناك؟
صار الفترة الثانية 25 يوم تقريبا أو من شهر 25.
أكم واحد كانوا في شفاء من حماس؟
السؤال هذا متنوع يعني حماس في أكثر من جهة في حكومة في مباحث في.
بحكي معك على نشطاء حماس.
إيه؟
نشطاء حماس.
مش أقل من 600 ل 1000 يعني.
Separately, the IDF has now confirmed that Hamas deputy military commander Marwan Issa was killed in an Israeli airstrike this month. Issa was eliminated in the strike carried out about 2 weeks ago, along with Ghazi Abu Tama, one of the planners of the October 7th massacre.
לפי מודיעין של שב"כ ואמ"ן, שמרואן איסה חוסל בתקיפה שביצענו לפני כשבועיים יחד עם רזי אבו תמה. מרואן איסה, סגן של מוחמד דף, מספר 3 בחמאס, מתכנני הטבח של 7 באוקטובר.
They deny the kidnapping of our children, the murder of our grandchildren, the rape of our daughters. The new Nazis we face today will stop at nothing to destroy civilization as we know it. The World Jewish Congress was created exactly for these times like this, so every Jew can fall asleep at night knowing they are safe in their own home. We are a voice for the Jewish people everywhere. We are the World Jewish Congress.
And joining us now with more on the war on day 173 is Brigadier General in the Reserves Amir Avivi, founder and CEO of the Israel Defense and Security Forum. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So we seem to be at an impasse. Israel seems to be sort of stuck in its war. Hamas is still standing, and Israel's hands are tied with the Rafah operation. What can you tell us? I mean, how can Israel move forward from here to win this war?
Well, I think we need to convey a clear message to the American administration. Without a ground incursion in Rafah, we're going to lose the war, and this will be devastating, not only for Israel, but for the whole Western world. So we need to go into Rafah and achieve the goals of war, which is destroying Hamas, it's a governmental and military entity, and releasing the hostages, and also securing the Egyptian border to ensure that there won't be, again, a buildup of force in the Gaza Strip. Now, the administration is demanding to see a plan to move the people who are in Rafah outside of Rafah in order to make sure that they won't be in danger. And it's time that Israel presents such a plan. It's not so complicated. We moved them 30 miles from the city of Gaza all the way to the south. Now we have to move them maybe 3 miles. To the coastal area, possibly to Khan Yunis. It's not as complicated as people might think, but we need to present a plan. After that, I think maybe we really will be able to proceed and carry out this ground incursion.
I mean, there is a clear consensus here in Israel that Hamas must be eliminated. But looking at Hamas leaders today, they seem unfazed and very sure of their continued survival, holding open meetings and press conferences in Tehran, thanking the United Nations for passing the UN Security Council resolution. So what is Israel waiting for in moving ahead? I mean, is it solely halting its operations now due to its conflict with the United States?
Well, I think that we want to be coordinated with the U.S. We are also continuing to operate in Khan Yunis and in the northern part. We are still carrying out missions in other places in Gaza, but going into Rafah is imminent. And by the way, it also affects our readiness for the north. I mean, we have been saying from day one that we're on the offensive in Gaza and on the defense on all other fronts. The question is, how long can we be on the defense on the Lebanese border when our citizens cannot go home? I mean, we need to really start looking at what will happen with Hezbollah and our ability to push them northern of the Litani River. We cannot really seriously go into this before we finish the job in Rafah. And by the way, eliminating Hamas, destroying their leadership, releasing the hostages, this is maybe the only chance we have to deter Hezbollah enough to be willing to seek a diplomatic solution. If we don't do that, we'll find ourselves fighting on both fronts, and this is going to be a very, very challenging war.
All right, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Amir Avivi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much.
And moving on, one of the released hostages is speaking out for the first time about her ordeal in Hamas captivity in Gaza and of the sexual assault and beatings she endured. Just a warning to our viewers, there are disturbing details involved. ILTV's Rachel Safdie is reporting from Tel Aviv with the story.
Hi, Lidar. Well, yes, yesterday we learned for the first time through a New York Times article that a hostage spoke out about the sexual assault and the torture that she underwent during Hamas captivity. Her name is Amit Soussana. She's an Israeli lawyer, and she was kidnapped from Kfar Aza, her home in Kfar Aza, on October 7th by 10 Hamas men. We know from the infamous video that she tries to fight the men off, and she made it very hard for 10 men to drag her into the Gaza Strip. But eventually she was taken there, and we understand from her testimony that for the first 3 weeks she was held captive by one man in a child's room, in a SpongeBob-themed child's room, and that this man would constantly ask her about her sex life and about her menstrual cycle. And then eventually, after she finished to shower one day, he held her at gunpoint, dragged her into the room she was being held in, and forced her to commit a sexual act. Eventually, she was also she switched captors, and the other captors tortured her, they beat her, and they laughed while they did it. So this was just a very hard testimony to hear, and the New York Times emphasized that the information she shared actually coincides with the information the Israeli medical team shared. And we know that there is still 19 female hostages being held by Hamas, 14 of them most probably alive. So we can only imagine the atrocities that hostages who have already been released and the hostages who are still there, the 134 people who are still there, have endured and are enduring under the hands of these terrorists. So we can only hope they come back soon.
All right, Rachel, thank you for the report. Very disturbing details emerging. And the dispute between Israel and Washington continues to simmer. A top Biden administration official rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's claim that the U.S. failure to veto the UN resolution for a ceasefire led Hamas to harden its stance in hostage talks. Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer insisted the U.S. policy change led to a Hamas celebration. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Relations between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu sank to a wartime low after the U.S. failed to veto a Security Council motion demanding an immediate ceasefire. During discussions with visiting Defense Minister Gallant, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had a strong message on U.S. expectations.
Now, we continue to share the goal of seeing Hamas defeated. So we'll discuss alternative approaches to target Hamas elements. And we must also plan for Israel's security after this conflict ends. And that includes working in renewed cooperation with the Palestinian Authority and our regional partners to stabilize Gaza and to move toward a two-state solution.
Gallant said that Israel's focus since October 7th had not changed, defeating Hamas and returning the hostages.
We will discuss developments in Gaza the means to achieve our goals, the destruction of Hamas organization and bringing back the Israeli hostages back home.
A top Biden administration official rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's claim that the U.S. abstention led to a hardened Hamas stance in the hostage mediation talks.
So that statement, which I believe said that Hamas pulled out of the hostage talks, or Hamas rejected the most recent proposal because of the United Nations Security Council resolution, that statement is inaccurate in almost every respect, and it is unfair to the hostages and their families. And I can tell you that that response was prepared before the UN Security Council vote, not after it.
Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer told Bloomberg TV that the Prime Minister was right to cancel his trip to Washington to discuss alternate options for dealing with Hamas in Rafah.
And if you look at the text, and everyone can go see it on the UN website, and you look at the resolution 5 days ago, and you look at the resolution that passed yesterday, you'll see a huge difference. And unfortunately, that's a change in U.S. policy. Now, I'm glad to hear that John Kirby said it's not a change in U.S. policy, and I hope that they will continue to connect those two issues. But that's not the text of the resolution, and that's why Hamas celebrated the resolution and welcomed it. That's why Iran welcomed it. Believe me, any resolution by the UN Security Council that Hamas welcomes is not a good resolution for Israel.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And while Gallant and Austin were meeting in Washington, D.C., another meeting was taking place between Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and the Islamic Republic's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran continue to openly flaunt their close ties. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh arrived in Tehran on Tuesday for a series of meetings with Iranian officials, including with Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. During a joint press conference, Hamas's leader said Israel was failing to achieve its military or strategic goals in Gaza. What's more, he praised the UN Security Council resolution that the United States abstained on and said this indicated that Israel was losing the support of the West.
يفقد المظلات السياسية والحماية حتى في مجلس الأمن كما رأينا بالأمس في القرار الذي صدر عن مجلس الأمن رغم أن هذا القرار جاء متأخراً.
Following his meeting with the foreign minister, Haniyeh also met with Khamenei, and according to WANA news agency, the Ayatollah expressed Iran's support for the Palestinians in Gaza. This marked Haniyeh's second visit to Iran since October 7th. Israel has long maintained that Iran, the largest state sponsor of global terrorism, has direct links to Hamas and has been backing the terrorist group even prior to October 7th. And while in the past the two sides sought to play down this relationship, today they feel emboldened to openly strengthen it. And in the north, one person was killed and several wounded today when Hezbollah fired a barrage of 30 rockets into Kiryat Shmona. Iron Dome air defense system downed some of the rockets, but there were several rocket impacts causing damage. One rocket directly struck an industrial building in Kiryat Shmona, resulting in a fire. The fire and rescue services pulled the lifeless victim from under the rubble. He was named as 25-year-old Zahar Bashara, a resident of a Druze town in the Golan. Earlier, the IDF confirmed carrying out strikes against Hezbollah in northeastern Lebanon after the terror group fired a barrage of some 50 rockets in northern Israel. The IDF says fighter jets struck targets 120 kilometers deep into Lebanon, targeting the Hezbollah aerial unit. The strike hit the military compound, which included a launch pad for drones and several buildings. And in the wake of the war in the north, more than 60,000 residents of Israeli towns and communities bordering Lebanon remain out of their homes. They've been displaced for more than 170 days due to cross-border fighting. And worse, they have no clue when they can return home. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Israel has created a kind of security zone against Hezbollah attacks, but instead of an IDF operation to create a buffer zone inside Lebanon to push the terrorists away from the border, the security zone is inside northern Israel. Over 60,000 residents were pushed out of their towns and villages in early October, and there are no promises of when they can return.
We have 60,000 Israelis that are evacuated by the order of the government, 60, meaning that they took a suitcase and they went out very quickly. Most of them went out without getting orders. They live, when I say live next to the border, literally, it's defense of the community and defense of the border almost the same.
With government subsidy, most remain evacuated to safer areas in central Israel, leaving their communities empty and deserted.
We are a ghost city, and this is unspeakable situation. People are refugees in their own home, and it must change. We cannot let it continue.
Even with Iron Dome air defense, some rockets have hit targets near the border. The damages to homes and infrastructure are significant. The Iran-backed Hezbollah and the IDF have been trading fire since the start of the war in Gaza from October 7th. Hezbollah began firing rockets into Israel, and Israel has responded with deadly force. Israeli leaders have warned that a war with Hezbollah is not unlikely.
The interest of Hezbollah today, in my point of view, of course, this is my analysis, is to drag Israel into war, is to create an unbearable situation for Israel, to create a feeling of insecure in these communities and even further south. I live 9 kilometers from the border. My life completely changed.
The view from Kiryat Shmona is that the current situation must change either through diplomacy or war.
And just as northern citizens' lives changed drastically since the start of the war against Hamas, so have the daily lives of first responders. United Hatzalah was present and active on October 7th, helping anyone in need as Hamas's murderous rampage swept southern Israel. Since October 7th, the Psychotrauma Unit, a team dedicated to minimizing PTSD in emergency patients, has been offering help to the very EMTs that spend hours saving lives. Let's take a look.
The Psychotrauma Unit, the point of the Psychotrauma Unit is to prevent the onset or to mitigate the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder.
I've seen things that I can never unsee. I've treated injuries that I wish I never have to see again.
We do that by trying to intervene as early as possible after some kind of traumatic event happens. We get a lot of people who go into this kind of loop of, no, this can't be, no, it can't be, tell me it's not true, tell me it's not true, it's not happening, it's not really, come back, stay with us. We have what we call the internal Psychotrauma Unit. Sometimes when we reach out to the EMTs after a regular call, like a CPR on a baby, okay, we get I have often heard, nah, I've seen things in my life, everything's fine, I've been there before, done that before, I'm fine. Nobody said that after October 7th. I did not hear one EMT say, seen this before. Nobody had seen this before. The sheer volume, I think, of wounded, the sheer volume of deaths, the chaos that they witnessed was something that they had never seen before. And that even when they couldn't talk, the fact that they weren't able to say that screamed at me. By the next morning, I had a list of nearly 600 EMTs who had been in the kibbutzim in the south, removing the wounded. From there, I spent basically the entire Sunday, eventually I got some help as well, just matching each one of them up with one of our 138 volunteers. Our professionals were taking 3 phone calls, 4 phone calls, and we tried to make sure that every single EMT had an address that they knew they could turn to for help. October 7th didn't really end on October 7th. It went into the next day. It went into part of the next week. a lot of these EMTs weren't available emotionally to begin processing even until a good few days, some of them even weeks later.
Many first responders are starting to talk publicly about their stories, about the atrocities they witnessed with their own eyes.
So many bodies, so many dead people, so many people that lost their legs, their hands.
And I'm not even talking about the smells, I'm not even talking about the shootings, that the silence, it was silent. Hundreds of soldiers, but silent. The only thing that you hear is shooting and shooting, and at one point they tell you, lie on the ground, leave the patient, just lay on the ground.
התחושה הזאת שהיא מתארת שם, של אם הייתי יכול להגיע קודם, זה מה שמלווה אותי לאורך, מאז אותו יום. זה מה שאני מרגיש שאני חסר לי.
The reaction that you have to this traumatic event within the first 3 to 4 days is fine. In other words, you're not expected to function perfectly after you've been in some kind of traumatic event. We call it a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Once you get past the 4-day mark or thereabouts, then you're going into an acute stress disorder. Lack of functioning, so sleep could be affected, eating could be affected, inability to concentrate. It can include flashbacks of what you had seen, heard, smelled.
You can't sleep. You close your eyes and you have too many sights. It's not even sights. Too many people. Too many dead. Too many injuries. And it's terrifying to close your eyes. Terrifying.
יש לנו מענה מאוד טוב של חוסן בתוך הארגון.
אוקיי.
היו לי איתם כמה שיחות.
איך אתה ישן?
יש לילות ויש לילות.
אתה חולם על זה לפעמים?
כן. היו לי כמה חלומות שהתערבבו לי כבר במציאות, של מסיפורים, ממקרים שפשוט נכנסו לי כאילו אני הייתי שם, כאילו אני חוויתי אותם.
And that goes till about a month. If it continues after a month, then it's considered PTSD. Again, the goal of the psychotrauma unit is to get in there during the ASR, the acute stress reaction, and mitigate or prevent all the rest of it from happening. Sometimes people get there on their own, and they're fine, but the percentages of people who can't do that are high enough that the intervention is really, really worthwhile to make sure that they get there.
זה לא היה קל לראות את כל מה שראיתי, את כל מה שאני אישית עברתי, ואם לא יחידת החוסן שתטפל בי, לא הייתי נמצאת כאן כרגע.
I could see that there's some scarring that's going to take a while to undo and to repair, and I'm hoping that many of them will come for the help that they need so that they can continue helping saving lives.
And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Partly cloudy skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 17 degrees Celsius or 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, clear skies are expected alongside steady temperatures sitting at highs of 28 degrees Celsius or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Lidarga Velazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.